I want to elaborate a little bit more on what I was talking about in my last video, in regards to, well, a couple things. In regards to the rift that I've been discussing in many of my videos between uh, the romantics and the realists, particularly in this sort of philosophy or this subconscious belief, that the romantics or the romantic mindset is a thing of the past, and realism is more of a contemporary psychology, in literature and art. Um, there's another point I made, though, that I think was a bit muddled in my last video that I want to explain more clearly, which was the use of sort of the over-reliance I see sometimes on tongue-in-cheek or irony or sarcasm in contemporary writing. I mean, you even see this in Hollywood scripts where the humor is not really that interesting. It cheapens it, but it's sort of tit for tat, and it's like sometimes it goes on for too long. But sometimes, and sometimes I think the problem with the way that I think it ties into the realist kind of contemporary psychology is the sort of pandering, or I think a better word for it is that it's trying to be too safe or too cute with things. It doesn't really. It's like a kind of a fear of being too ambitious with concepts, with ideas. That it's, and that's sort of what I mean by pandering. I guess it's trying to make it so that everything pretty much is written as if it is a movie script. And whereas I think that in the book that I'm reading, in case you haven't watched the other videos, I've been discussing the book Pale Fire. It doesn't do any of that, particularly in its descriptions of heaven or the afterlife. That John Shade, this poet in the book Pale Fire, who the narrator is describing in his poem called Pale Fire, he talks about a couple of near-death experiences, one of which is his own, where he sees a white fountain when he has a stroke, or a seizure is what it is, and he crosses over and he sees it, comes back to life. And then another near-death experience where a woman sees the light shining on the stained glass windows and the hint of angels, as she describes it. And it says in the newspaper where she's describing this experience that she sees a white fountain as well, but that was actually a misprint, and actually it was a white mountain, which gives, I think, John Shade a lot more doubts about whether what he experienced was just a hallucination or whether it was something actually had an independent existence or not. But that's another story. I think really my point is that he obviously, I think, in this writing, there's no fear of being very ambitious. I think of getting into the depths. And as I mentioned a couple, I think it was last week, there was one content creator, Pen and Poison, who, when she's published books before, works have gotten rejected, or publishers have suggested to her, contemporary publishers have suggested to her that she cut down the philosophizing, which is kind of it's an odd sort of odd thing to say, I think, to somebody in that position. But however, I think the farther you go back in time, when you look at the way that real satire and irony and the way that these tools have actually been implemented in literature, like I remember a while ago I was discussing A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and I even remember these scenes still, where Scrooge, when the ghost of Jacob Marley enters, and Scrooge is debating whether it's about something that he ate that's causing it, and something about beef, or I can't remember exactly the line, but it was hilarious. These little touches, but they don't cheapen the text, because there's psychologically there isn't as much of a distinction between all of these different categories that I think in more contemporary literature that we make about these things. And I think that that's definitely a strength that you see even in the book Pale Fire, in the book, and also in many of Philip K. Dick's stories. Philip K. Dick, as I've discussed, is a science fiction writer who wrote a lot of stories that predicted things, or was speculating about horrible things that were going to happen, the result of people's negligence, their gullibility, and the Minority Report, being one of his very famous stories, does the same thing. But the satire always indeed does serve a purpose. It's not there to simply amuse people, to show you that, hey, I'm just kind of an earthy writer, that I'm a down to earth kind of writer that's not doesn't take things too seriously and is not too concerned about things. But I also think, however, there's also the flip side of, I think, of sometimes the postmodernist sort of writing that takes itself too seriously. I mean, that can be just as much of a problem, like I remember the play Waiting for Godot, where it's completely formless and nihilistic and chaotic, and I thought it was like it's presented as if it's supposed to be more comedic. Like, you can almost imagine these two mimes, or these two like clowns on stage, these goofy guys, but everything that comes out of their mouth is just like, it's like kind of just like a bunch of philosophy that goes on for hours and hours. And so that's also why, as a writer personally, I always fish for a lot of things that go way in the past, where there wasn't as many of these sort of psychological distinctions between things, where everything worked very unanimously. And that's what created a body of work, I think, that was complex and that could be interpreted, I think, in many different ways. And even particularly, I think, the psychological distinction that we see between, the romantics or the realists, those lines also start to blur when you even think about music. Like, technically, even though we think of Beethoven or the late Mozart works as the first romantics, the first introduction to the romanticism, even then, it's not. They also had a very understanding, a solid understanding, as I've explained, of the base, of the vulgar, of the chaotic, but also of the the sense of order, the sense of whatever it was, they can kind of craft together. So I think that as I've been crafting my own book series, I think it's been something I've been keeping in mind.